Well, hey, friends, Patrick Kirby here from Do Good Better Consulting. Welcome to another guest expert training. We got a great one for you today, and it is a spooky Halloween episode because we are talking about being fearful in the shadows of a capital campaign. And I could not be more stoked to join my friend Shannon Schweigert, who is probably one of the smartest people that I know in this neck of the woods as far as capital campaigns go. Shannon, how are you?
I'm doing very well, Kirby. Right out of the gate, Patrick.
Hey, listen, I go with that. It's Kirby works for me as well. Hey, my friends call me Kirby. This is good.
This is good. I know I'm doing very well. I appreciate the opportunity to share with the folks today. It's going to be a great half hour.
I think it's going to be fantastic. So we're going to dive right through it, but why don't you give a little background on you, how you got yourself involved in capital campaigns, or what you do now, how you got there, and why we're talking about it today.
Well, my company is called Pace Fundraising. Was recently formed with my partner, Michael Overby, out of St. Paul. Michael's a North Dakota native that worked with me when we had Giving Point, which was downtown on Broadway at 222 Broadway back in the early teens. I think right now we couldn't afford you can't run a fundraising consulting firm on Broadway anymore, Patrick. But
no, you cannot.
Yeah, most people probably recognize me from either Giving Point or my time with Jamestown College, the University of Jamestown. Also spent some time with Impact Foundation. I've been doing this since 1992. So just getting started in the industry, but I enjoy what I do. I'm one of those crazy people like yourself who enjoys raising money.
It's a bizarre world to be in, and I know that a lot of people who just kind of have just a general fear of fundraising, and then when you add this sort of concept of capital campaigns, it gets even crazier. So let's dive right into kind of the theme today is going to be sort of calming your fears as it regards to the capital campaign. And I know one of the big ones that they have right out of the gate, most people, is they hear capital campaign and they're like, holy crap, everybody we've been asking money for the annual fund is going to go completely out the window, and we're never going to get any donors again, and we're going to ask all of our people for a large amount of money, and they're going to hate us. Talk a little bit about why we should be setting aside some of the fears of eliminating an annual fund or it just blowing up when we're considering doing a capital campaign. And a capital campaign, too, in major gift campaigns, so it could be like a mini campaign or a big building, whatever the case may be. How do you address this on making sure that the annual fund isn't going to go away at all?
Well, we have a very simple technique. We incorporate the annual fund into the capital campaign, and that does a couple of things. It raises the profile of the annual fund. We always say the annual fund, unrestricted annual giving, is the highest form of giving, Patrick, and here's why. Most times people give to the annual fund and say, use it where needed. I trust you. So it's the highest form of giving. We incorporate the annual fund into capital drives for a couple of reasons. One, it raises the profile. Two, it makes it an inclusive campaign. So there's something for everyone. Your high net worth donors can participate. Your sacrificial giving donors can participate. And the people giving monthly, giving the $25 or $50 a month, are included in your capital campaign. And that's why we do that. We make it inclusive rather than exclusive.
I like it. See, that I think is really interesting too, where not enough people think about capital campaign gifts as unrestricted too. Acquiring gifts from people who have said, I trust you as an organization. I'm going to give you a capital campaign gift. I'm not going to require it to build a sign or a water fountain or a doorstop or whatever. I believe in your mission so much, I'm going to give you even a larger portion of the gift. And that is the super, super awesome, like the highest.
You know, one of the greatest gifts that can be given is the gift to help operate the capital campaign, because capital campaigns cost. It's like running concurrent operations. You're never going to see more people. You're never going to have more lunches, more dinners, more travel. So there is a cost to the organization. And one of the things that we go out and will do early on in capital campaigns is find donors to support the capital campaign effort. And so that in and of itself creates an opportunity where you're not going to take away from the annual fund by the added expenses of the capital campaign. You know, the other thing that we find, Patrick, is you have to be very careful when you're running a capital campaign, because your donors and supporters will not accept any downgrade in services during a capital campaign. In other words, you can't say, you know, over these next 2 years, we're going to be running a capital campaign to make our organization better by adding X, Y, Z. But in the meantime, our services are going to diminish. They won't accept that. So you have to maintain or increase services during a capital campaign, and it's the perfect time to increase your annual fund. You're never going to see more people than you do during a capital campaign. You're never going to see more face-to-face. You're never going to have more volunteers out. Make your annual fund part of the capital campaign and make that drive part of increasing your effect on your mission.
I love that. Now, so get out there more. People are going to know about you. You're all over the place. The excitement of the build. You've got this excitement of a brand new expansion of your organization. A lot of people, though, I think, are fearful that that's going to burn people out from a donor base. You can kind of see it seething in the back. Like, well, people are going to get sick and tired of us. They are going to get tired of giving to us. How do you counter that as a natural reaction from somebody who fundraises a lot, going, I don't want to wear them to the ground?
Well, that is absolutely correct, Patrick. One of the biggest fears is, are we going to our donors too often? Should we leave well enough alone? And that really plays into the beginning of a capital campaign and the vision for a capital campaign. Capital campaigns must be transformative. In other words, you know, a perfect example that I will use is a very simple example. Let's say you have a copier or a printer, and you're looking at it. It's a nice, high-speed, black and white printer. Now we're going to go out and we are going to get a new printer. It's going to be faster. It's still going to be black and white. It's just going to allow us to do things a little bit faster. Is that transformative? Not really. If it is a color printer that 3-hole punches and staples and saves time, it creates efficiency so that staff can now do more things and move the mission forward. And obviously, I'm using some very simple terms. That now becomes transformative. Planned obsolescence is not a reason for a capital campaign. In other words, this piece of equipment is now old and useless, but we're going to replace it and we're going to do the same thing. You have to move the organization forward. You have to be greater in your competition. You have to provide greater service. If your campaign is transformative, your donors will respond to that because they want you to be better. They have been supporting you for decades or for whatever number of years or whatever amount of dollars and support that they've given you. If it's transformative, they will follow you into the capital campaign.
You know, I've often said this in some of the trainings I've done and in some of the work I've done with organizations. Big donors like big audacious goals. And so if you have this transformative piece to your organization, all of a sudden the donors are going to go, yeah, I like this more than I do like these kind of tiny, we're going to get we'll just kind of keep going the way we're going. It intrigues people who have capacity to give, because now their capacity to give is going to make exponential amount of impact at your organization, which, by the way, they already love because they give to you during the annual campaign, right?
That's exactly right. You know, Patrick, during my career, I've been fortunate to learn from some of the best fundraisers in this region. And you and I have often quoted Jim Holdman when we get together, because Jim was a master at language. You know, grew up in Missouri. He was a storyteller like none other, which is what we do in our business. We share stories.
Right.
But Jim would always come into training with his nonprofits of various sizes. And in one particular day, through his sessions, he would say, "What's your $10 million plan?"
Right.
And they'd say, "Well, we'll never get a $10 million gift." And then Jim would say, "Aha, If you don't have a $10 million plan, you're never going to get a $10 million gift. And isn't that true?
It's so true. I know.
If you don't have a vision for that plan, and that's where a compelling case for support. So your board and your executive team has to be sure that the goal of your campaign is transformative, and then they have to support it with a compelling, dynamic, transparent case for support. And that needs to be done in many ways: multimedia, print, video, presentations. It has to be laid out to make your case, even to your most ardent supporters. And if you can do that, you're not going to burn out your donors, because they will see this is something different.
Yeah, and it also will help internally at your organization as well. I mean, if you don't lay out a case of support for everybody else but your staff, I mean, your staff and your board and your volunteers themselves need to have the buy-in to this organization, this kind of transformative stuff too. And that's another thing that leads into sort of your volunteers, the ones who are kind of championing your cause, or even employees at this point. There's a real good fear, I think, of burning out your volunteers, your staff. How do you overcome that from a mental standpoint?
Well, there's a couple of techniques that we use. One is, we are strong believers in systems and process. Fundraising is probably 90% art and 10% science, but that 10%, the systems and process of fundraising, comes into play most particularly in capital campaigns, when you're using volunteers and when you have limited staff time. We work with a lot of 1- and 2-person shops, and running a capital campaign means you're running concurrent efforts. You're doing twice the amount of work in the same year. So we use systems and process, and when it comes to volunteers, they are going to rely on those systems and those process, because we don't have maximum time from our volunteers. We have to maximize their influence. Volunteers and volunteer campaign teams are selected because of their influence, not the time they have to put in. They're busy people. They have work, family, their other efforts, because most often we see volunteer campaign teams, the makeup, the people on those teams, they're working 2 or 3 different organizations, right, as far as a board member or volunteer. So what we do is develop very concise tools for the volunteers, so that they can go in with the confidence that they understand the case. They have it in several methods, print, video. They can share with their donor prospect and say, read this. I'm going to leave this behind. I'm going to give you an overview, but I'll leave this behind. Or go to the website and see this 5-minute video or this 3-minute video. But then also the nuts and bolts, alert letters, scripts, how to approach this on the phone. One of the most important things we say to volunteers is, be yourself. Approach a donor prospect at the level of your relationship. If an alert letter would be inappropriate, if it's somebody you golf with every Tuesday, don't send him or her an alert letter. At the end of golf, very quietly say, Monica, I'm a volunteer at Memorial Hospital. We've got this capital campaign. Would you and Ed be willing to sit down with me for 20 minutes so I could discuss it with you? Do it that way. Do it at the level of your organization, so it isn't uncomfortable.
Yeah.
Proposals.
Be a normal human being.
Be a normal human being.
Interacting like another normal human being, and don't be weird about it. I mean,
absolutely. Don't be weird about it. Don't be nervous. We define the objectives of the campaign for the volunteers through staff, obviously through staff and board, and have manageable contact lists. You can't ask somebody to approach 25 individuals in a month. We manage our campaigns so that at the most, in any calling period, and usually they're about 6 weeks from open to close, the most you would ever have is 3 or 4 during any open period, because people have to be able to do it at their pace. It doesn't happen overnight. They can't be overwhelmed. And the one thing we keep in mind, this is a quote from my partner, Michael Overby. We share this early on in the campaign with volunteers. We are very open about the difficulty of fundraising. And Michael always says fundraising is never easy, but done properly, it can be enjoyable. You are an ambassador for the organization as a volunteer. You're showing your belief in the organization, your influence within that community, within that sphere. So don't maximize their time. Don't ask them for more of their time. Ask them to maximize their influence.
Mm-hmm. Well, and the other thing too is that also helps, not saying you got to go and meet with 25 people, or not, you got to go do formal presentations here, here, and here. You need to bang down the doors of every business that's on the top business list of everybody else. That managing of expectations and that sort of clear expectations from your board and from your donors and your volunteers makes it a lot easier, right? That muddled communication, or like, you need to go and meet with 30 people. It's unrealistic.
It's unrealistic.
And they quit on you, right?
Well, and the other thing we don't do in our campaigns, Patrick, and what I advise others when they're looking at who is going to call on whom, we don't do assignments. It's self-select. We put prospects in front of, we use a lot of intel from staff and from boards, so we can generally narrow it down to who may be the best volunteer to call on this prospect, but we let them self-select. Everybody has what we call relationship risk. Maybe there's a business relationship that we don't know about, so it would make it uncomfortable. Maybe there is a professional relationship that we don't know about. So we want our volunteers to self-select. To hand them an envelope and say, here's your assignment, is really uncomfortable. Yeah. We want them to be in control of who they call upon. And that's why, in addition to our campaign team volunteers, we have what we call COIs, Centers of Influence. And they may only be available to call on one or two persons as a member of a campaign team, a calling team, but we use centers of influence. So when we interview people in feasibility stage, we ask two things. We'll ask them, would you be interested in being a volunteer for this? And they say, boy, my time is limited. I'm on 3 other campaigns. Would you consider being a center of influence with a particular donor or donors? And they almost always will say, yeah, I'd do that because I'm the right person with Ed and Marilyn. Right. So we give plenty of opportunities to maximize that influence.
So you got your volunteers, you've got your donors, you've got your annual campaign. Don't be fearful of any of those things. I think one of the big things, even talking about capital campaigns or even major gift campaigns. Let's just say it's a mini campaign. You need to raise $100,000 or $150,000. Some of these big numbers to small organizations seems like mountains, right? I think generally speaking, there's an overwhelming fear of what if we just fail miserably at the whole thing, and that fear of perfection perfection is always in the way of progress, right? So if we don't have every piece of material perfect, we don't have every donor that we have vetted, we're never going to do it, so we're not going to move on it. And I think it's that fear of just failing miserably or failing in general at a capital campaign or a major campaign really prevents people from even being successful in the first place. How do you get that out of people's brains?
Well, that is probably, in addition to volunteer burnout, to annual fund effects, to staff burnout, fear of failure is one of the biggest things. We've never done this before, Shannon. Now we want to raise $1 million for this addition. We want to raise $1 million for this piece of equipment that would really move us forward. Here's where campaign council comes into play. And here's what campaign council owes you. Campaign council owes you the organization and the momentum and design of your campaign. They may or may not go in the field with you. At Pace Fundraising, we go in the field. We're a field ready, a field trained. So we actually go into the field. We always say, we won't call on your donors alone because we're hired guns. Mm-hmm. And they want to see the passion in your eyes. But we'll go with you. We'll go along with you to support you because we've done this many, many times before. But the planning and the organization is what campaign council owes your organization if you hire them. Another Michael Overby quote, a good alpha leads to a good omega. Probably comes from his frat boy days. I'm not sure where it comes from, but he is correct. Even in small campaigns, and when we say small campaigns, in our experience, it's like the old saying, there's only small fundraisers, there are no small campaigns. But, even in something of $500,000, which isn't a large fundraising goal, we advise 3 to 6 months of preparation, and here's why. Whether or not you're going to do a feasibility study, whether that is imperative in your case, and sometimes if there's grantors involved, they want a feasibility study. You need to do prospect propensity. It's a system that we use to say who are the most likely donors to this, regardless of their capacity, who is most likely to give to this campaign, who's most likely to say yes. You need to develop that case for support. And I'll go back to what we said earlier. Be sure this is a transformative campaign, that this just isn't doing two things, that this isn't an annual fund type effort where it's just keeping the lights on, doing this or that, but that it's actually propelling our organization and moving it forward. We also have to make sure in a campaign, Patrick, that we're not throwing more good after bad. Debt campaigns are difficult. They're very difficult to run. There's other ways to deal with debt. It's hard to excite a donor base about a debt campaign. It's hard to excite a donor base to continue to fund something that essentially isn't helping the organization move forward. But those are the things that can be done in that 3 to 6 month period to organize this campaign, to make sure we have the right volunteers, the right message, the right talking points, the public relations plan is in place. And we have to win the campaign internally during this 3 to 6 month period, because if we don't win it internally with staff and with others in the organization, we're never going to win it externally. Now, what your campaign council owes you in campaign during the actual campaign itself is encouraging the volunteers through early success. We design our campaigns. You'll often hear consultants say, well, campaigns are top down. You have to call on the biggest donors first. Well, we don't necessarily espouse that. We think you have to call on the people that are going to say yes first. Because you're running a campaign with volunteers, they need early success. They have to see some success. If the first 10 people that your volunteers collectively call on say no, that isn't very encouraging. And your donor base is also going to have fence sitters. They're going to say, I'm going to wait and see how this is going to go. So in that first 6 months of the campaign, when we're in the field, we want momentum. We want a lot of yes. And we want to know through organization and through data where we are at any given time so that we can project how this campaign is going to go. Those are all of the things that can help prevent failure.
Here's another question, and just a couple of questions that are popping up from our live friends is, what's the percentage when you go public from a quiet phase? I know it's a weird answer across the spectrum, but you get, depending on the size and the scale and the momentum and sort of there's a lot of what ifs, but is there like an average or a percentage you should be collecting in the silent phase before you go, hey world, guess what we're just about to do?
Well, rule of thumb is always 50%. You better have 50% before you announce a goal. And we continue to work with that. However, modern media has changed the rules in a lot of things. Silent phases of campaigns, which were never silent in the old days either. We wanted people talking about it. We wanted them to know. Not the only thing we kept quiet was what our ultimate goal was. And we continue to work with that today. We have floor goals and ceiling goals that are internal, where we talk about, after the feasibility study, here's what we think is a floor. Here's what we think is a reach goal, the ceiling that we can do. Essentially, anytime you're going into a campaign, you better have some idea of where your support can come from. if that's the purpose of the feasibility study, that's the purpose of the early phases of the campaign, are to get out there with those with the greatest propensity. Again, you certainly can't count a person who has never given to your organization before simply because they have wealth capacity. Mm-hmm. But if you have a person with the propensity to give to you, you need to get out and see them early, get an idea of their gift early in the campaign, start adding up some numbers and saying, here's where we are. And generally, the old rule of thumb is still pretty solid, 50%. But there are many consultants right now that are saying, don't announce a goal till you know it's all in the hopper. And that's why campaigns never fail, Patrick. They always hit goal because a goal is never announced until we're certain where we're going to be. But the rules have changed with social media. The other thing is people with the preponderance of campaigns and the preponderance of nonprofits that are out there, people are going to be asking you more and more, what is your goal, particularly in your private meetings with them. So having, it is okay to announce your floor goal and your reach goal, your ceiling goal. It's okay to do that, particularly with your most ardent supporters. It's part of transparency.
Yep, I love it. All right, so we talked about not being fearful of annual gifts because that's used as part of the campaign. We talked about, developing a really keen sense of case of support so that your donors themselves are not going to get burnt out, and even your volunteers to kind of build that internally on that. And then really, you're not going to fail at the goal if you take, I think one of the points I think we should emphasize is patience leading up to a capital campaign where you need to grind for that 3 to 6 months to just plan. You can't just announce one day at a meeting like, hey, you know what we should do? Let's raise $1.5 million. This sounds like a good idea with no planning and process. So you have to build the process. You have to be patient with it. Make sure your prospects. What's one thing that we should be scared about? Not to frighten everybody, but like what's one thing that we should be worried about when entering the discussion piece of a capital campaign?
We do something in our feasibility studies. We test communications. How has the organization communicated with their constituency? And we test formal communications versus informal communications. Formal meaning presentations by the organization, visits and stories in the local media, the newspaper, radio station, website, blogs, etc., versus informal, the coffee shop. The one thing you should be fearful of is letting informal communication take over. So therefore, your communication has to be abundant. You have to give the community and your constituency plenty of opportunities to learn about your campaign, because informal communication can be detrimental to your organization. If a rumor gets out, get on it. If a rumor gets out and they say, you realize if they raise this $10 million, they're moving their plant, their physical plant, out of our community and into another one. You have to attack that, address it, get on it, have a community meeting, get it on your website, get to the newspaper. Informal communications can be devastating. And when we test it in feasibility, 90% of persons who are receiving capital campaign information informally tend to be against the campaign. When they're receiving it formally, 90% of the people are with the campaign and in support of it. So the biggest fear, the thing you should fear about a capital campaign, is rumors and informal communications.
I freaking love it. Well, that's one of the quickest 30 minutes I've ever been involved in my entire life. I cannot thank you enough for your expertise and your time this morning. Thanks to everybody who joined us live. Thanks to everybody who's watching in the replay. Shannon, how can people get a hold of you if they have questions as a follow-up, and how can they get in touch with you to kind of answer some questions on potential or current capital campaign stuff?
They can reach me at my email address, shannonschweigert@outlook.com, or they can find us through our website, pacefundraising.com.
As always, I will drop the link in the comments below. Ask any other questions. We'll keep the dialogue going in perpetuity about capital campaigns. Shannon, thank you so much for your time today, man.
Thank you for indulging me. I love talking fundraising.
we are fundraising dorks, and it is awesome. I love it. Talk to you later, man. Thanks, everybody. Have a great one.